3 nights ago, my own father looked me straight in the eye and told me I had 72 hours to leave the house I saved from foreclosure, the house I spent years fixing, the house I poured $50,000 into. And the worst part? They were giving it to my brother, the same brother who hadn't lived here in 6 years. But what they didn't know was that a few hours later, I would uncover a secret loan in my name, and it was about to destroy all of them. My name's Riley Carter. I'm 29 years old, and I've lived most of my life in Bozeman, Montana. From the outside, my life looks pretty normal. I'm a freelance graphic designer. I work with small businesses around town, and most days I'm buried in coffee, deadlines, and late-night design projects. But for the last few years, there's been one thing tying me down more than anything else: my family's house. The place I grew up in, the place I spent years trying to keep from falling apart. And the night everything changed started like any other Sunday dinner. My mom was serving meatloaf. The smell of roasted potatoes filled the kitchen, and my sister Emma was scrolling on her phone under the table like she always does. I was halfway through telling a story about a client who wanted a ridiculous neon pink logo for a law firm when my dad suddenly slammed his glass on the table so hard it rattled every plate. The whole room went silent. Then he looked straight at me and said in a cold voice, "You've got 3 days to move out." At first, I honestly thought he was joking. My dad liked dramatic moments, but the look on his face told me this wasn't one of those times. He leaned back in his chair and added, "We're putting the house in Jake's name." Jake is my older brother, the same brother who hadn't lived in this house for almost 6 years, the same brother who moved to Seattle chasing startup, dreams that never really worked out. Meanwhile, I was the one who stayed. I was the one paying bills when things got tight. I was the one fixing broken pipes, patching drywall, and replacing appliances. 3 years earlier, when the bank threatened foreclosure, I emptied nearly $50,000 of my own savings just to keep this house from being taken away. But apparently none of that mattered anymore. My mom kept her eyes on her plate like she suddenly found mashed potatoes fascinating. My sister didn't even look up from her phone. And Jake sat there, leaning back with a smug little grin like he'd just won something. For a moment, I felt this heavy pressure in my chest. But instead of arguing, I quietly set my fork down, pushed my chair back, and stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't slam anything. I just said, "All right," and walked down the hallway to my room. But the moment I closed the door behind me, my mind started racing. Something about the whole situation didn't make sense. I'd spent years helping my parents keep that house afloat. I'd invested my time, my money, and honestly, a big part of my life into fixing that place up. You don't just forget about that overnight. So instead of packing my stuff like they expected, I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was check my bank accounts. Everything looked normal. No strange withdrawals, no missing money. Then I checked my credit report just to be safe, and that's when my stomach dropped. Right there on the screen was a $75,000 personal loan opened 4 months earlier under my name. My social security number? My supposed signature. But I had never applied for any loan. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, some kind of reporting glitch. But when I clicked into the details, I saw the lender was a small credit union right here in Bozeman. And when I looked further down the application, I saw something that made my hands start shaking. The secondary contacts listed on the loan were my parents and Jake. I sat there staring at the screen for what felt like forever. Slowly, everything started making sense. About 4 months ago, Jake suddenly came back to town after his latest tech job collapsed. Around that same time, my parents started acting strange about money. Bills disappeared from the kitchen counter. Conversations stopped the second I walked into the room. There were late-night phone calls they refused to explain. It all lined up too perfectly. They had taken out a massive loan using my identity, probably to bail Jake out of whatever financial mess he had gotten himself into. And now they wanted me out of the house before I figured it out. Around midnight, I called my friend Marcus. We'd known each other since high school, and now he worked in compliance at a bank in town, which meant he dealt with financial fraud all the time. When he answered, he sounded half asleep. But the moment I started explaining the situation, his tone changed. The more details I gave him, the quieter he became. Finally, he said, "Riley, if this is real, that's identity theft." Hearing those words out loud made everything feel heavier. Within an hour, he confirmed the loan existed and that it was all ready, 2 payments behind. Then he told me something that made my chest tighten. If the loan defaulted, The collectors wouldn't go after my parents. They would come after me. That was the moment something inside me shifted, not in a dramatic way, just a quiet switch flipping in my mind. I stood up and slowly walked through the house. The living room was the first place I stopped. The large gray sectional couch sitting against the wall was something I saved for months to buy. The custom wooden shelves along the far wall were something I built myself over a weekend. The big television mounted above the fireplace was also mine. Then I walked into the kitchen. The stainless steel refrigerator, the coffee bar setup, the lighting, fixtures over the counter, every single one of them had been paid for with my money. I kept walking room to room, taking mental inventory of everything I had invested into that place. By the time I reached the laundry room where the washer and dryer sat humming quietly, I already knew what I was going to do. If my family wanted the house so badly, they could have it exactly the way it had been before I fixed it. The next morning, I woke up early and started making calls. First, I rented a storage unit on the edge of town. Then I contacted a local moving company and asked if they could send a crew that same afternoon. The guy on the phone asked how big the job was. I told him, let's just say I'm taking everything that belongs to me. By 2 in the afternoon, a moving truck was parked outside the house. Watching the movers carry furniture out of the living room felt strange at first. The warm, comfortable space I'd spent years building slowly started to echo again as the couch, shelves, and television disappeared. Room by room, the house started returning to the worn-out shell it used to be. Around 5 o'clock, right as the last boxes were being loaded onto the truck, a car pulled into the driveway. Jake stepped out wearing sunglasses and a wrinkled, button-down shirt like he'd just come from some fake business meeting. The moment he walked into the house, he froze. The empty living room clearly wasn't what he expected. He looked around and shouted, "What the hell happened here?" I leaned against the doorway and calmly said, "Hey, Jake." His eyes moved across the bare walls and empty floor. "Where's all the furniture?" he demanded. I shrugged. "Took it." His face immediately turned red with anger. "This is my house now," he snapped. That's when I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed copy of the loan agreement. I held it up and said quietly, "You sure about that?" He frowned and asked what I was talking about. I pointed to the paper. "Recognize this?" The moment his eyes landed on the document, the confidence in his face disappeared. I looked straight at him and said, "You forged my signature on a $75,000 loan." For the first time in his life, my older brother didn't have a clever response. He just stood there looking nervous. He tried to brush it off and said I was being dramatic, but I told him I'd already talked to the bank and that I knew exactly what they had done. I explained that if the loan defaulted, the bank would come after me, which meant he, Mom, and Dad had committed identity fraud. The silence that followed felt heavy. Jake's expression shifted from anger to panic. Eventually, he muttered something under his breath, grabbed his phone, and walked back outside. I watched him leave without saying another word. As the moving truck drove away later that evening, I stood in the driveway looking at the house I once thought I would always protect. But something inside me had changed. For the first time in years, I realized loyalty doesn't mean sacrificing everything for people who don't respect you. And the next morning, I made the call that would change everything. I called a lawyer and told them the whole story, because this time I wasn't going to stay quiet.